Oh, hello, and welcome back to Baby Alice's Stories. We now return to Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm by Kate Douglas Wiggin. Chapter 30. Goodbye, Sunnybrook. Will Melvin drove up to the window and, tossing the letter into Rebecca's lap, went off to the barn on an errand. "Sister's no worse than," sighed Aurelia gratefully, "or Jane would have telegraphed. See what she says." Rebecca opened the envelope and read it in one flash of an eye, the whole brief page. "Your Aunt Miranda passed away an hour ago. Come at once, if your mother is out of danger. I shall not have the funeral till you are here. She died very suddenly and without any pain. Oh, Rebecca, I long for you so. Aunt Jane." The force of habit was too strong, and even in the hour of death, Jane had remembered that a telegram was 25 cents, and that Aurelia would have to pay $half for its delivery. Rebecca burst into a passion of tears as she cried, Poor Aunt Miranda! She is gone without taking a bit of comfort in life, and I couldn't say goodbye to her. Poor lonely Aunt Jane! What can I do, Mother? I feel torn in two between you and the brick house." "You must go this very instant," said Aurelia, starting from her pillows. If I was to die while you were away, I would say the very same thing. Your aunts have done everything in the world for you, more than I've ever been able to do. And it is your turn to pay back some of that kindness and show your gratitude. The doctor says I've turned the corner, and I feel I have. Jenny can make out somehow if Hannah'll come over once a day. "But Mother, I can't go. Who'll turn you in bed?" exclaimed Rebecca, walking the floor and wringing her hands distractedly. "It don't make any difference if I don't get turned," replied Aurelia stoically. "If a woman of my age and the mother of a family hasn't got sense enough not to slip off hay mows, she'd ought to suffer. Go put on your black dress and pack your bag. I'd give a good deal if I was able to go to my sister's funeral and prove that I've forgotten and forgiven all she said when I was married. Her acts were softer and her words. Miranda's were, and she's made up to you for all she ever sinned against me and your father. And oh, Rebecca," she continued with quivering voice, "I remember so well when we were little girls together, and she took such pride in curling my hair. And another time, when we were grown up, she lent me her best blue muslin. It was when your father had asked me to lead the grand march with him at the Christmas dance, and I found out afterwards she thought he'd intended to ask her." Here Aurelia broke down and wept bitterly, for the recollection of the past had softened her heart and brought the comfort in tears even more effectually than the news of her sister's death. There was only an hour for preparation. Will would drive Rebecca to Temperance and send Jenny back from school. He volunteered also to engage a woman to sleep at the farm in case Mrs. Randall should be worse at any time in the night. Rebecca flew down over the hill to get a last pail of spring water, and as she lifted the bucket from the crystal depths and looked out over the glowing beauty of the autumn landscape, she saw a company of surveyors with their instruments, making calculations and laying lines that apparently crossed Sunnybrook at the favorite spot where Mirror Pool lay clear and placid, the yellow leaves on its surface no yellower than its sparkling sands. She caught her breath. The time has come, she thought. I am saying goodbye to Sunnybrook, and the golden gates that almost swung together the last day in Wareham will close forever now. Goodbye, dear brook, and hills and meadows. You are going to see life too, so we must be hopeful and say to one another, grow old along with me. The best is yet to be. Will Melville had seen the surveyors too, and had heard in the Temperance Post Office that morning the probable sum that Mrs. Randall would receive from the railway company. He was in good spirits at his own improved prospects, for his farm was so placed that its value could be only increased by the new road. He was also relieved in mind that his wife's family would no longer be in dire poverty directly at his doorstep, so to speak. John could now be hurried forward and forced into the position of head of the family several years sooner than had been anticipated, so Hannah's husband was obliged to exercise great self-control, or he would have whistled while he was driving Rebecca to the temperance station. He could not understand her sad face or the tears that rolled silently down her cheeks from time to time, for Hannah had always represented her Aunt Miranda as a irascible, parsimonious old woman. Parsimonious old woman. Irascible. Irascible. Having or showing a tendency to be easily angered, irascible, irritable.
Parsimonious.
Parsimonious, unwilling to spend money or use resource, stingy or frugal. For Hannah had always represented her Aunt Miranda as irascible, parsimonious old woman For Hannah had always represented her Aunt Miranda as an irascible, parsimonious old woman who would be no loss to the world whenever she should elect to disappear from it. Cheer up, Becky, he said as he left her at the depot. You'll find your mother sitting up when you come back, and the next thing you know, the whole family'll be moving to some nice little house wherever your work is. Things will never be so bad again as they have been this last year. That's what Hannah and I think. And he drove away to tell his wife the news. Adam Ladd was in the station and came up to Rebecca instantly as she entered the door looking very unlike her bright self. The princess is sad this morning, he said, taking her hand. Aladdin must rub the magic lamp, then the slave will appear, and these tears be dried in a trice. He spoke lightly, for he thought her trouble was something connected with affairs at Sunnybrook, and that he could soon bring the smiles by telling her that the farm was sold, and that her mother was to receive a handsome price in return. He meant to remind her, too, that though she must leave the home of a youth, it was too remote a place to be a proper dwelling either for herself or for her lonely mother and the 3 young children. He could hear her say as plainly as if it were yesterday, I don't think one ever forgets the spot where one lived as a child. He could see the quaint little figure sitting on the piazza at North Riverboro and watch it disappear in the lilac bushes when he gave the memorable order for 300 cakes of rose red and snow white soap. A word or two soon told him that her grief was of another sort, and her mood was so absent, so sensitive and tearful, that he could only assure her of his sympathy and beg that he might come soon to the brick house to see with his own eyes how she was faring. Adam thought, when he had put her on the train and taken his leave, that Rebecca was, in her sad dignity and gravity, more beautiful than he had ever seen her. All beautiful and all womanly, but in that moment's speech with her, he had looked into her eyes, and they were still those of a child. There was no knowledge of the world in their shining depths, no experience of men or women, no passion, no comprehension of it. He turned from the little country station to walk in the woods by the wayside until his own train should be leaving. And from time to time he threw himself under a tree to think and dream and look at the glory of the foliage. He had brought a new copy of the Arabian Nights for Rebecca, wishing to replace the well-worn old one that had been the delight of her girlhood. But meeting her at such an inauspicious time, he had absently carried it away with him. He turned the pages idly until he came to the story of Aladdin and the wonderful lamp, and presently, in spite of his 34 years, the old tale held him spellbound as it did in the days when he first read it as a boy. But there were certain paragraphs that especially caught his eye and arrested his attention. Paragraphs that he read and reread, finding in them he knew not what secret delight and significance. These were the quaintly turned phrases describing the effect on the once poor Aladdin of his wonderful riches, and those descanting upon the beauty and charm of the Sultan's daughter, the Princess Badrul Budur.
Badrul about her.
Princess Badrul Budur. Not only those who knew Aladdin when he played in the streets like a vagabond did not know him again. Those who had seen him but a little while before hardly knew him. So much were his features altered, such were the effects of the lamp, as to procure by degrees to those who possessed it perfections agreeable to the rank. The right use of it advanced them too. The princess was the most beautiful brunette in the world. Her eyes were large, lively, and sparkling. Her looks sweet and modest. Her nose was of a just proportion and without a fault. Her mouth small, her lips of a vermilion red, and charmingly agreeable symmetry. In a word, all the features of her face were perfectly regular. It is not therefore surprising that Aladdin, who had never seen and was a stranger to so many charms, was dazzled. With all these perfections, the princess had so delicate a shape, so majestic an air, that the sight of her was sufficient to inspire respect. "Adorable princess," said Aladdin to her, accosting her and saluting her respectfully, "if I have the misfortune to have displeased you by my boldness in aspiring to the possession of so lovely a creature, I must tell you that you ought to blame your bright eyes and charms, not me." "Prince," answered the princess, "is it enough for me to have seen you, to tell you that I obey without reluctance?" Chapter 31. Aunt Miranda's Apology. When Rebecca alighted from the train at Maplewood and hurried to the post office, where the stage was standing, what was her joy to see Uncle Jerry Cobb holding the horses' heads. "The regular driver's sick," he explained, "and when they sent for me, thinks I to myself, my driving days is over, but Rebecca won't let the grass grow under her feet when she gets her Aunt Jane's letter. And like as not, I'll catch her today, or if she gets delayed, tomorrow for certain. So here I be, just as I was more than 6 years ago. Will you be a real lady passenger, or will ye sit up in the front with me? Emotions of various sorts were all struggling together in the old man's face, and the 2 or 3 bystanders were astounded when they saw the handsome, stately girl fling herself on Mr. Cobb's dusty shoulder, crying like a child. "Oh, Uncle Jerry," she sobbed. "Dear Uncle Jerry, it's all so long ago and so much has happened, and we've grown so old, and so much is going to happen that I'm fairly frightened." There, lovey," the old man whispered comfortingly. "We'll be all alone on the stage, and we'll talk things over as we go along the road, and maybe they won't look so bad." Every mile of the way was as familiar to Rebecca as to Uncle Jerry. Every watering trough, grindstone, every watering trough, trough, every watering trough, grindstone, red barn, weather vane, duck pond, and sandy brook. And all the time she was looking backward to the day, seemingly so long ago, when she sat on the box seat for the first time, her legs dangling in the air, too short to reach the footboard. She could smell the big bouquet of lilacs, see the pink flounced parasol, feel the stiffness of the starched buff calico, and the hated prick of the black and yellow porcupine quills. The drive was taken almost in silence, but it was sweet, comforting silence both to Uncle Jerry and the girl. Then came the sight of Abjah flags shelling beans in the barn, and then the Perkins attic windows with a white cloth fluttering from them. She could smell Emma Jane's loving thought and welcome in that little waving flag. A word and a message sent to her just at the first moment when Riverboro chimneys rose into view. Something to warm her heart till they could meet. The brick house came next, looking just as of yore, though it seemed to Rebecca as if death should have cast some mysterious spell over it. There were the rolling meadows, the stately elms, all yellow and brown now. The glowing maples, the garden beds bright with asters, and the holy hawks rising tall against the parlor windows, only in place of the cheerful pinks and reds of the nodding stalks, with their gay rosettes of bloom, was a crepe scarf holding the blinds together, and another on the sitting room side, and another on the brass knocker of the brown painted door. "Stop, Uncle Jerry. Don't turn in at the side. Hand me my satchel, please. Drop me in the road and let me run up the path myself. Then drive away quickly." At the noise and rumble of the approaching stage, the house door opened from within, just as Rebecca closed the gate behind her. Aunt Jane came down the stone steps, a changed woman, frail and broken and white. Rebecca held out her arms, and the old aunt crept into them feebly, as she did on that day when she opened the grave of her buried lover and showed the dead face, just for an instant, to a child. Warmth and strength and life flowed into the aged frame from the young one. "Rebecca," she said, raising her head, "before you go in to look at her, do you feel any bitterness over anything she ever said to you?" Rebecca's eyes blazed reproach, almost anger, as she said chokingly, "Oh, Aunt Jane, could you believe it of me? I am going in with a heart brimful of gratitude." "She was a good woman, Rebecca. She had a quick temper and a sharp tongue, but she wanted to do right, and she did it as near as she could. She never said so, but I'm sure she was sorry for every hard word she spoke to you. She didn't take 'em back and laugh, but she acted so to know, to know her feeling when she was gone. I told her before I left that she'd been the making of me, just as mother says, sobbed Rebecca. She wasn't that, said Jane. God made you in the first place, and you've done considerable yourself to help him along. But she gave you the wherewithal to work with, and that ain't to be despised, especially when anybody gives up her own luxuries and pleasures to do it. Now let me tell you something, Rebecca. Your Aunt Mirandy's willed all this to you, the brick house and buildings and furniture, and the land all round the house as far as you can see. Rebecca threw off her hat and put her hand to her heart, as she always did in moments of intense excitement. After a moment's silence, she said, "Let me go in alone. I want to talk to her. I want to thank her. I feel as if I could make her hear and feel and understand." Jane went back into the kitchen to the inexorable tasks that death has no power, even for a day, to blot from existence. He can stalk through dwelling after dwelling, leaving despair and desolation behind him, but the table must be laid, the dishes washed, the beds made by somebody. 10 minutes later, Rebecca came out from the great presence looking white and spent, but chastened and glorified. She sat in the quiet doorway, shaded from the little borough world by the overhanging elms. A wide sense of thankfulness and peace possessed her as she looked at the autumn landscape, listened to the rumble of a wagon on the bridge, and heard the call of the river as it dashed to the sea. She put up her hand softly and touched first the shining brass knocker and then the red bricks glowing in the October sun. It was home. Her roof, her garden, her green acres, her dear trees. It was shelter for the little family at Sunnybrook. Her mother would have once more the companionship of her sister and the friends of her girlhood. The children would have teachers and playmates. And she? Her own future was close folded still, folded and hidden in beautiful mists. But she leaned her head against the sun-warmed door and closing her eyes whispered, just as if she had been a child saying her prayers, "God bless Aunt Miranda. God bless the brick house that was. God bless the brick house that is to be." The end. Good night, baby Elias.